All right. Enough of the shenanigans playing around. I'm back after a semi-long hiatus. It depends on how you interpret time. Anyway, I've been doing like life stuff, overwhelmed every single day, but I started to reprioritize what I believe is something that I've always enjoyed doing. It just takes a lot of time and energy and preparation and all that kind of stuff to do, which is why I'm going to say one thing and one thing only. We're about to get this done in an hour before kickoff happens for the NFL. This is my NFL season preview. I will also be doing predictions for every single game for week 1. And if you are interested in any of the pick'em leagues that I have set up, I did one for standard against the spread, and I did the confidence one that they have on ESPN. Hit me up on Twitter at FB_playbook. Hit me up on Twitter at TheAshtonJ, and I can send you the link. Or if you have my phone number, just text me. You know, that's for the elite few. Anyway, let's get the show started for the first time in a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else in between, I'm Ashton Gene Lewis. This is the Broke Boy Sports Podcast, the only one of its name, because I'm pretty sure I outlived that one other podcast that was just like two dudes in their garage talking. Don't look it up. Anyway, you can check this out on YouTube right now. We're streaming live, and I'm working on getting back to posting podcasts in general. It didn't seem... I'm working on getting back to posting more podcast episodes across all of the platforms and stuff like that, and getting the show popping again on more than one platform. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about in what is quickly turning into just an hour in 2 minutes before the NFL season kicks off. I say that not knowing exactly when opening kickoff is, because I'm sure it's like somewhere probably in the vicinity of 7:30, because that's the oldest hustle in the game, guys. If you don't know, telling everybody that the game starts at 7 and it actually starts at 7:15, which is it starts at 7:20, so I have an hour and 20 minutes, and honestly, I'm challenging myself to get through this in an hour, We have one slide that we're going to stick with the entirety of this entire thing. So, as you can see, I had a bunch of hotkeys that went off all at one time because that's how OBS works. Anyway, it's time to get to work, time to get busy on this one. The show may seem a little erratic overall. It's because it's my first time back, you know? Like, I'm not a rookie to the game or anything like that, but it's been a while since I've done this show. So none of this is coming off the dome, and that's the problem. I got to do a bunch of stuff to intro things. Like, for instance, we have a couple of lists that we're going to do here. I have the... top 3 teams most likely to go winless, top 3 teams most likely to go undefeated this season, even though I know both of those are massive outliers overall in terms of the NFL as a whole. Let's be for real. There's some teams that are out there tanking. One is very obvious. One is not so obvious. We'll see what happens as the season goes along, right? Because tanking can also be a mid-season endeavor in terms of trying to get those top 10 picks. This upcoming draft seems to be the presumptive number 1 overall pick is Caleb Williams. That's obviously before the scouts have had a chance to dive into a bunch of information and watch a bunch of film. You know, Caleb is a quarterback, plays the most valuable position in the game right now. But you never know. There might be some D-tackle that pops up. That's usually how it goes. Like, it starts off like, oh, this is like hands down, no questions asked, the number 1 guy, and then life happens, right? So let's talk about... Well, we'll see what happens when I click this first hotkey. Which one is the first one that comes up? Oh, most likely to go winless this season, in my opinion, in my humble, uneducated opinion. I'm just a dude that watches the games, right? So, obviously, number 1 on the list is the Arizona Cardinals. Basically, everything that they've done since the beginning, actually prior to the beginning of this season, has said, hey, man, we're not really interested in that business of winning, which hopefully means that the Arizona Cardinals fans are not in the business of spending their money to go watch that team. I will say this, if you are from Texas, in particular in Houston, we gotta be kind of chill about how much shit we talk about the Cardinals this year, because their starting QB looks like it's going to be Clayton Tune, who is the starting quarterback for the University of Houston before he got drafted this past season. So got to give our boy a little bit of room. Got to give him some room to live. You know what I mean? So my number 2 on this list is pretty interesting. I would say not interesting. It actually makes sense when you talk about it, because let's be for real. Every team in the NFL is one injury away from going winless on the season overall. Of course, there's so many times this is the big emphasis and the big point that I made overall. There were so many times last season where the Minnesota Vikings basically did their thing, and it came down to the last 2 possessions of the game to determine who was going to win it. And if you remember the season before, a lot of their games came down to the last 2 possessions, because I'm pretty sure more than half of their games in the last 2 seasons have come down to 1 possession or 2 possessions or less. And it's kind of been like a coin flip. I wouldn't even say a coin flip because, skill and stuff like that. But for the most part, the Minnesota Vikings have been kind of riding this tightrope in terms of their ability to be successful overall. I'm interested to see what happens if something like, per se, we've seen the offensive line situation kind of rear its ugly head. They've got a brand new running back who they're familiar with, but let's be for real, the last 4 years, basically, with the Minnesota Vikings, they have done a decent job of running the football, but overall, a lot of people could argue they didn't run it enough, and that was a big issue. We had multiple offensive coordinators get fired. Multiple offensive coordinators get fired with the Minnesota Vikings for the simple fact that they refused to run the ball with Dalvin Cook. God damn it. Anyway, that combined with there's a new running back in town, Alexander Madison, and a lot of you guys went out of your way and said, "Ooh, new starting running back. He's not a keeper for anybody. He can be drafted," because nobody picked up Madison to keep him, right? The Vikings weren't really about running the ball when they had Dalvin Cook. Doubt they're really going to turn into a run-heavy team this season with Alexander Madison. Kirk Cousins, obviously a guy, if you didn't see the Netflix special, Quarterback, where they just followed around Marcus Mariota, Kirk Cousins, and Patrick Mahomes, and for a lot of people, kind of endeared Kirk Cousins to him. I will say, for me personally, his wife kind of creeped me out. Anyway, we can talk about that some other time. Kirk was powering through a massive rib injury that he sustained early on in the season, and kind of powered through cold weather games, by the way, which I can't imagine having like bone injuries like that and having to do it in the chilling cold. But hey, that's why he gets paid the big bucks. That's why he's Captain Kirk. You know what I mean? But for the most part, Kirk Cousins played all of last season hurt, and it reared its ugly head at the worst possible times on multiple occasions. A lot of people banking on Justin Jefferson to have a huge season overall this year. That doesn't take away the fact that, like Kirk Cousins, we're all one play away from getting hurt. Offensive line play for the Minnesota Vikings wasn't great last season. Doubt it's going to improve this year. They're one injury away. I mean, Kirk Cousins goes down, then what happens? You know what I mean? I can definitely picture them falling off the rails, especially considering the drop that we're probably going to see from them in terms of defensive presence as well. A lot of what they did last season, and you can look up tons of videos on this, every single team in the league knew that they were running quarters half man, right? Whereas like there's quarters coverage on the left side of the field, on the right half side of the field is just straight up man coverage, which is like they use the right side of the field because that's the side that the primary X receiver is typically on, right? That the predictability of defense, we'll see if that carries over into this season, because if that's the case, it's going to be even more difficult for them to pull it off because they have gotten significantly younger. There's some draft picks who haven't necessarily proven out to be the guys that they drafted them to be, which, hey, guess what? That's every single team in the NFL. Everybody thinks that they drafted the next superstar, and when you don't become that superstar, everybody acts like, it's an act against Congress that you're even on the field playing football for their team, even though a lot of dudes are obviously at the upper echelon of playing this game of football, but when it comes down to it, everybody expects you to be Darrelle Revis when you're a corner, and that's just not how life works in real life and in the NFL. So the drop in defensive presence, the risk with the offensive line situation, plus how close every single game has been the last 2 years for the Vikings, I can see all of it coming off the rails for them this season. And number 3, speaking of coming off the rails, fuck them picks has finally come back to fuck the Rams. Number 3 is the LA Rams. They've got a lot of older players. Cooper Kupp is not going to be starting this season, which, by the way, RIP to everybody who drafted like 2 months ago, which is insane to me. But yeah, Cooper Kupp, who had surgery last season, missed a couple of games, came back this year, has a hamstring injury, and is reportedly a couple days ago went to go get a second opinion out of state. And, of course, Aaron Donald still being one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Everyone else around him turns out not the greatest defensive player of all time. Jalen Ramsey, they're going to have one full season where Jalen Ramsey isn't there because he's with he's with the Miami Dolphins now, which is crazy to think about. But, yeah, that's massive. That's massive overall. And I think, there's been weird reports that have come out from Matthew Stafford's weird wife. She's weird because I don't know her as a person, and it's so strange because like Matthew Stafford, and I point this out for people who forgot. Matthew Stafford kneeled during that time period. I don't even think it was like in 2020 or anything like that, but like he kneeled during the national anthem, and his wife is like staunchly like thin blue line. I wouldn't even say anti-Black Lives Matter, but she's like very clearly not about the lifestyle where you kneel down, and Matthew Stafford did it, and it makes me wonder like which part of Matt is fake. You know what I mean? Like which part of Stafford is fake? Whatever. Hit me up in the comments if you have any idea of how that went down. Anyway, Rams with aging Matthew Stafford. Offensive line situation was an issue, massive issue last season. I guess we're gonna find out if they fix that. Running back situation. Everybody's looking at, Charbonnet, Zach Evans, and Cam Akers to fix the problem. If they ain't got a run game, they ain't got a chance. Defense has been on a massive decline because they've had a mass exodus of free agents, right? Like, Aaron Donald's still there, but they had Von Miller for that one season. Bobby Wagner showed up, left. He's back with the Seattle Seahawks. Jalen Ramsey is gone. This is going to be a down year for the Rams, and they might be down bad because quite frankly, if there was ever a team that could benefit from just throwing away an entire season, even though they have traded away pretty much every single pick that they've ever owned, this might be it. But based off of the fact that they've traded all those picks away, they might be all in, and it probably won't matter either way because the talent level that they need to be able to be competitive on a regular basis across the league is just not there. And I'm still waiting to see that Van Jefferson that we saw all those years ago come back. I miss that guy. He was really good. He still is really good. Just waiting for the situation to appear and make it happen. Anyway, that's all I got. Let's see what this next hotkey has that I programmed today and forgot what it says already. This is probably most likely to go undefeated, and it is. So number one on my list, the Philadelphia Eagles, because their system works really well. They've retained a shit ton of players. Other than I think their biggest loss, in my opinion, is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Obviously, at the safety just defensive back position overall, he was near the top of the league in terms of interceptions, and his biggest thing that he provided was the confidence for the pass rush for the Eagles to get home. And that's another thing too. Like, would you call it a mosh pit? Where it's just like a heavy rotation of defensive linemen who are like heavily veteran. They're like heavily skilled veterans who have been paving the way for the younger players behind them to be able to go out there and get busy. And, we've already talked about how the Eagles are a team that has drafted vast majority of the Georgia defensive front from 2 years ago when they won the national championship versus Alabama. Understandable. I feel like that's a good plan. If you're playing against, eventually, the league will be filled with the current crop of college football players. Why not get the guys who were able to beat all those guys on your team together, right? But yeah, I think the defense is going to be there for them. I'm obviously interested to see how the secondary pans out for him overall, especially when it comes to getting the pass rush to be able to reduce the pressure on the secondary, just because there's been some losses in the secondary. Darius Slay, obviously a year older, playing at the top of his game the last couple of years, but you can only be at the top of the mountain for so long, right? That means somebody else got to step up, and it's got to be the dudes with the younger knees. It's got to be the guys with the younger knee joints, I think, in my humble opinion. But yeah, man, that the Eagles feel like they are on the verge of being able to do something because they've taken the pressure for Jalen Hurts to have to make big plays off of him because believe it or not, their offense is so variant because they're able to, run the football. Interesting how that works out. Their ability to run the football has paved the way for their quarterback to be able to throw deeper routes down the field, get more their wide receivers to get more separation, and for them to not be so one-dimensional. Who would have thought? There's some benefit to having everything available to you in terms of being able to get yards and get further down the field, as opposed to like the one thing. Whatever. Moving on. We don't have time for that conversation. The San Francisco 49ers. This is banking heavily on Brock Purdy, not only coming back and being the guy that he was before the injury, but also being better than he was last season, considering that he's got another year under his belt. The 49ers have bailed completely on Trey Lance as a quarterback, which is interesting to say the least. But Brock Purdy coming back and being better because, let's be for real, they got all the talent in the world. They got the wide receiver who's also a running back. They got the running back who's also a wide receiver, and they just got the pure amazing wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk. They have an elite level tight end in George Kittle, and combine that with the fact that they have the number one linebacker in the NFL, a great defensive mind up front, and they get a ton of pressure overall throughout the course of the season. I can see the San Francisco 49ers going undefeated, and I'm throwing the Kansas City Chiefs in there for number 3 just because you can't count out the team that literally has the guy that has changed how we perceive what a good quarterback is forever. The standard for what it takes to play quarterback has now changed permanently because of Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, unlikely to go undefeated because they might be losing a little bit here, a little bit later on tonight, somewhere around 7. Well, it'll be like 10 o'clock when the game is over or whatever, but they might be having an L already in the column when they face off against the Detroit Lions. That's all I got on most likely to go undefeated. Let's see. The next thing I wanted to do before we get into like talking about teams, I wanted you to focus on some stuff that may be outside of your comfort zone because that's important. 1, it gives me an excuse to do a shit ton of research, and 2, it makes you a better football fan, and that's kind of my goal when I make this podcast, to kind of make you a smarter football fan or a smarter fan, a sports fan in general. So number 1, I have 5 dudes that I think you should pay attention to and root for, regardless of what team you support, right? Even if this guy's on your rival squad, I want you to look at this person and think that you want good things to happen for them. Also, it's just an excuse to tell the absolutely insane stories of how NFL players become NFL players. So let's take it from the top here. This is Kader Kahu. He is the starting cornerback for the Dolphins, right? He was born in the Ivory Coast. I watched an interview where he talked about he took like 7 flights from the Ivory Coast to immigrate to the United States of America. He lands in Texas, ends up growing up in Texas, and I'm pretty sure Kader went to Trinity High School in Euless, Texas. Once again, if you're a Texas person, we kind of have to root for our boy Kader out here. He was born in Azerbaijan and went to Trinity High School in Euless. He then went on to be a 0-star recruit. Went to Texas A&M Commerce, though. Shout out to the Lions. After doing that, he was a UDFA after the draft that he jumped into, right? And then he is now the starting corner for the Miami Dolphins. He actually played starting corner for them last season as well. This is his first full-fledged season at the starting cornerback position for the Miami Dolphins, and I find that kind of insane. I find that wild as hell to think about. Like, this guy a couple years ago, you talk about like 15 years ago, was in the Ivory Coast. He didn't start playing football until he was in the 7th grade. And now he's a starter in the NFL for a Super Bowl contender. Pretty dope. Moving on, we got Antonio Mafi. This one real close to my heart. As a fat guy, I got mad respect for this dude, and we'll talk about it here right now. Former rugby player turned defensive lineman in high school, turned offensive lineman in college, went to UCLA. He entered college at over 400 pounds, and I bet you a bunch of you heard this story in the pre-draft lead up to last year's draft about Mafe and how his weigh-in was going to be massively important. He dropped and gained over 100 pounds in the course of his college career, and of course now that he's in the NFL, I think he's listed at 329 pounds, which is crazy to think about, just because there's all these stories about what he used to eat and all this kind of stuff like that out there in the internet. You should go check those out. It was a 5th round pick for the New England Patriots, and now he's the 2nd string offensive guard. And this is for all the big dudes out there who get told constantly that being fat prevents you from being an elite level athlete, because Antonio Mafe obviously is an elite level athlete who just so happens to be 400 pounds. And I respect that a shit ton, because it's hard to be that big and also just absolutely dominate people, which is what he did at the high school and at the collegiate level. Transfer, like I said before, rugby background tells you rugby background to offensive lineman tells you all you need to know, especially if you're a person who played football before. You know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Definitely a guy that I'll be rooting for throughout the course of the season, even if I don't necessarily care for the Patriots way. Moving on to the next person, Brandon Stevens. Some of you may be familiar with him. He plays corner for the Baltimore Ravens. He went to Plano High School, where he played running back. He committed to UCLA as a running back, didn't get a ton of time on the field for the 3 years that he was in college, because he graduated from college in 3 years. Obviously a guy who wasn't going to school just for football purposes. He graduates from UCLA in 3 years. He then transfers to Southern Methodist University, aka SMU, the team up in Dallas, if you will, as some people would like to say. He transfers to SMU, transitions from running back to corner, and in the course of 1 year graduate school, he becomes good enough to become a third-round pick at cornerback in the NFL. You know how difficult, you know how good you have to be, just like stupid good as an athlete, and then on top of that, intelligent enough to be able to make the switch from running back, already super difficult position that requires you to know pretty much everything about the offense in and out in terms of blocking, run lanes, and running, and being able to run routes. Then transfer to SMU and then play high-level Group of five football at the second most difficult, probably most difficult defensive position out there, second most difficult position in the game because all the rules are against you, and play corner. Amazing dude, Brandon Stevens. One of the many reasons why I believe the Ravens are going to have a great season upcoming, because, you know, we'll talk about it a little bit later when we look at the Steelers defense, because it's absolutely absurd what they got going on, but I think the Ravens got something cooking. Moving on. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. It was only a matter of time before that happened. We got Bernard Raymond. He's the Colts left tackle. Dude is from Austria, like the country of Austria. Grew up there. I'll tell you this much right now. You got to be a baller if you went to a high school called Ball Sport Gymnasium Wynn. That's literally the name of his high school. He basically went to like sports high school. Like if it would be like, we play sports ball high school here, is the name of his high school. He served in the Austrian military. I'll be honest with you, playing left tackle for the Colts is probably going to be the most difficult task he's ever had to face as an individual. He went to Central Michigan after he did his required service for the Austrian military. He went to Central Michigan, played alongside some other NFL players. He actually transitioned from tight end to left tackle and then was drafted. He was expected to be, according to some people's draft boards, he was expected to be a first-round pick, but slipped all the way to the third round to the Colts. And if you know what's been happening for the Colts at left tackle for the past 4 years, essentially, it's been a carousel, and I don't mean carousel in terms of the insult of being a tackle where they just run past you. I mean, it's literally been like 12 dudes in 4 years who have played left tackle for the Colts, and they've been looking for the guy for a really long time. And I feel like maybe going into a season where you got a rookie quarterback, you got a lot of, the Colts are not necessarily, basically the only really prominent wide receiver for the Colts, really prominent pass catcher for the Colts is Michael Pittman Jr. Everybody else seems to really struggle in terms of being able to gain separation. It's gonna be it's gonna be a tough year. It's gonna be a tough year for Bernhard. Anyway, I just thought that was crazy that he's like, used to live in Austria, went to sports ball high school, and now plays left tackle, starting left tackle in the NFL for the Indianapolis Colts. And number one on my list is Foyesade Oluokun. He's the Jaguars middle linebacker. I think he typically wears number 36, so he may look like a D-back to some people or whatever. But anyway, he played middle school football with Ezekiel Elliott. He graduated from Yale with an economics degree. He didn't get invited to the NFL Combine, but was still drafted in the 5th round by the Atlanta Falcons, where he played a couple of years there. He's now with the Jacksonville Jaguars, like I mentioned before, and he has been the total tackle leader in back-to-back years in the NFL. Dude, a lot of people don't really talk about, mainly because a lot of people don't talk about linebacker in general anymore, even though I think linebacker is one of my favorite positions. I try and train for quad ball, for Quidditch, the weird sport that I play, by trying to train like a linebacker does in football, because I feel like it's super similar. I also obviously train like it's basketball as well, because it lends itself to that. But nonetheless, Foye Oluokun, that's the dude. I think that's wild as hell to be like, yeah, I graduated from the Ivy Leagues, but this side gig as an NFL football player is all cool. Also, if you type his name in, this really wild article comes up where he basically talks about how football is math, and that's one of the reasons I like him a lot. One of my middle school geometry. One of my middle school teachers basically in a tutoring session was like, you do understand that like athletes are some of the best mathematicians on the planet, right? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she talked about angle calculations and how that's something that athletes do at full speed while, going up and down the field with their heart rate super high. And it's some of the high level calculations that you need to be able to pull off on a regular basis. And that's high end math. So yeah, to see an NFL football player basically say what my 7th grade geometry teacher said was kind of cool. Anyway, that's all I got for you on that one. Those are the 5 people that I think you need to root for, no matter what team you root for. Obviously, there's a bunch of other wild paths to the NFL. Nobody becomes a professional athlete in a normal manner. That's just facts. Nobody becomes a professional athlete in a normal way. So, what else did I have? I think that's all. Let's see what I got here. Oh, before we dive into the week 1 schedule, I had these matchups right here that you're seeing over here on the left-hand side if you're watching on YouTube. These are the 3 pay-per-view matchups that I feel like are going to be the most exciting. And when I say pay-per-view, I mean that if somebody found a way to run an ISO camera on these set of matchups, I would pay them to watch these. Number 1 on the list is obviously the Dolphins are playing the Chargers later on Sunday, and I feel like this is going to be massive. Xavier Howard versus Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, depending upon how you interpret the Chargers offense, is going to be super dope. I don't know why I have it set up right here. Hold on, I gotta fix that. I'm losing my mind looking at it. Hold on a second here. Let me get busy on this real quick. This is why you don't do 50 graphics for a show, kids. Anyway, going back to the top. These are the pay-per-view matchups that if I had an opportunity to buy an ISO camera for this upcoming Sunday's NFL slate, I would pay people to watch these matchups, and just these matchups throughout the course of the game. The Dolphins defensive backs, the Dolphins secondary in general, versus the Chargers wide receivers, which is gonna be amazing, right? It's gonna be astounding. Xavier Howard versus pretty much anybody. We already talked about Kehu, who is gonna be a huge part of what the Miami Dolphins do this season, and at some point, we also got to talk about just overall in general the defense for the Dolphins looking pretty stout. But the defensive backs versus the Chargers wide receivers, whether or not we'll see Quentin Johnson, I guess we'll see Michael Williams and Keenan Allen versus all these guys up front is going to be a ton of fun, because it's going to be super difficult for both of these sides to be able to come out victorious. But this is just so much talent in terms of the defensive secondary and the wide receivers that it's hard to sit there and say, no thanks, I don't care about that. Number 2 on my list for the pay-per-view matchups this week and for week 1 of the NFL season, Donovan Smith, left tackle, in case you didn't know. Yes, that Donovan Smith from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Donovan Smith at left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs versus Aiden Hutchinson, defensive lineman for the Detroit Lions. I will also point out Justin Houston versus whoever he lines up against, because I think Justin flips sides sometimes. But Justin Houston is a guy who has like a stupid high snap to pressure, snap to sack ratio. He broke the single season record for sacks for a rookie, I think, in terms of like number of games played or something, because he didn't really start playing until like the midpoint of the season for the Detroit Lions. But Justin Houston is going to be massive for the Detroit Lions, especially if this season he's going to get more opportunities to play. Aiden Hutchinson, obviously the guy that everybody's been paying attention to, top 3 pick in the NFL draft, looked really good last season, had multiple touchdowns, had that insane one where he caught when he rotated out into the flat and ran it back. He's got some wild moves that have gone viral on Instagram. Aiden Hutchinson is also like a motor guy who just so happens to be huge, right? But him versus Donovan Smith, who is the consummate definition of a veteran offensive lineman. This is a guy who's got years and years and years in the NFL of experience of watching some of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And I can't wait to watch what he's able to, what if Aiden Hutchinson is even able to get the best of Donovan Smith at any point during this game, because it's going to be obviously a huge point of contention whether or not that influences the game or not. 0 pressures from the left-hand side of the field. You usually win in a lot of games, especially when your quarterback is Patty Mahomes, as some people like to call him. Number 3 on the list, of course I had to get a middle linebacker in here, but Fred Warner versus Najee Harris. Najee has been one of those guys for the last couple years. We saw his rookie season, he kind of got ran into the ground because he was the only offensive option that the Steelers had to offer. Now it looks like, and maybe it's just hype, maybe I'm falling for the preseason hype, Kenny Pickett looks like he can throw a ball further than 10 yards, which means it's really good for Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, because apparently they can catch really good. Who would have thought? NFL wide receivers who can catch. But yeah, those two guys are pretty dynamic up front. Obviously, we've been watching highlights of George Pickens making crazy catches throughout training camp and, of course, last season as well. Deontay Johnson has proven himself to be one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. And with the passing game back on the table, Najee Harris can become an even bigger threat. Fred Warner, the king of the linebackers in the NFL, undisputed king. The only guy I can really see giving him a push for that this upcoming season is Matt Milano for the Buffalo Bills. And I guess we'll see what happens, right? But Najee Harris versus Fred Warner is going to be a massive matchup for when the 49ers take on the San Francisco 49ers, a team that I just a couple minutes ago predicted potentially to go undefeated. We'll find out. But yeah, those are my pay-per-view matchups for the entire week. And I think I got one more. Oh yeah, I think the Miami Dolphins are going to win the Super Bowl. They got a ton of talent. I know a lot of people like to make really weird jokes about Tua and concussions or whatever, but to not point out how Tua is obviously taken has taken a step forward since he did his rookie season. When he's not under pressure, he's able to make plays. When he's under pressure, he's able to make plays. I think the Miami Dolphins are going to win the Super Bowl this year. They got a ton of talent. They've shown themselves to be really good in massive clutch situations. We saw them play against the Buffalo Bills last year in a really clutch situation, and it seemed like a really deep playoff run got completely derailed by 3 concussions, which happens for like 90% of the football players on the planet. If you concuss them 3 times in the entire season, they are going to not perform well. So that's all I got on that one. I think the Miami Dolphins are going to win the Super Bowl, and I'm not afraid to say it, unlike some other people. Anyway, that does mean that at some point they'll more than likely have to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And they seem to be one of the few teams that is capable of doing that. They have a star-studded secondary, plus Bradley Chubb's getting his first full year as a defensive lineman for the Miami Dolphins, plus Jalen Phillips, heavily underrated defensive end as well. I think we got it. I think we got that one. All right, now let's talk about week 1 of the entire NFL season. The right side of the screen is now going to be completely unused. I'm sure you've had a ton of time reading all those words while you're listening to a podcast. Anyway, let's take it from the top here. I'm going to drop some predictions. I'm going to tell you this right now. Oh, we need to bring it in. Bring it in. Everybody lean in real quick. Lean in. I need you to be chill about week 1. Look, there are people who get paid to overreact to everything that happens on the internet, right? That happens in the course of a football game. There are people who get paid a lot of money to do that. As a matter of fact, it's a lot of people, including Mina Kimes, who get paid to not overreact about that. I need you to just have a good time. I had this conversation at least a couple times throughout the course of the year, course of the season. Y'all need to have some fun. Some of y'all don't seem like y'all having fun watching football anymore. You don't necessarily have to have fun watching your football team, because I guarantee you somewhere in the NFL, there is good football going on. It may not necessarily be your squad. You might have to move around a little bit. You can watch your team, Because if your team sucks, they probably got a lot of noon games. As a Houston Texans fan, can confirm. There's been all but one season where I haven't had to be up at noon or 11 to get ready for the game beforehand. You know what I mean? Every single, like 99% of the games I've ever watched as a Houston Texans fan have been at noon. That may be changing a little bit because CJ Stroud may be the greatest Ohio State quarterback of all time, making him the greatest Ohio State quarterback to make it to the NFL of all time. We'll see. Only time will tell. But right now, it's week 1. Look at cool stuff, man. Have a good time. You're not going to learn anything this season. You're not going to learn anything this week. The Super Bowl champion, not decided this week, I promise you. I promise you. Anyway, let's take it from the top. The reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, take on the Detroit Lions, the scrappiest underdogs, even though they're Lions team in the NFL, the team that everybody loves the most. And quite frankly, let's be for real. In the last 10 years of Hard Knocks, the only team that's really paid off from the hype that Hard Knocks builds, right? Hard Knocks kind of, they were like, these guys are scrappy. Meet Jamal Williams, who went on to have a season that was on multiple fronts compared to stuff that Barry Sanders did last season, right? Jared Goff, a guy that everyone tried to convince you guys sucked, doesn't suck. Oh my God, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a guy that has clearly gone out and become a key playmaker for the Detroit Lions. So many things from Hard Knocks actually paid off, and that's a really rare situation. I just want to take a moment, especially considering because it seems like I feel like we're in the dying days of Hard Knocks. A lot of people didn't. I don't know how many people really were absolutely hooked on the Jets season because pretty much every single podcast I listen to, they kind of were over it. You know what I mean? The whole Aaron Rodgers thing is going to get beat to shit this entire season, and that's cool. Everybody needs a storyline. Everybody needs a face to connect to. Don't know why it has to be just the quarterback, but that's the world that we live in. Moving on. The Detroit Lions take on the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce is not playing in this game. He has hyperextended his knee. I think he tried to go through a warm-up earlier today, and it's just not happening. So we're going to see. Sky Moore, I'm going to tell you this right now. Sky Moore is trending on Twitter right now. That's how rough it is right now. That's how tough it is in these streets. The Detroit Lions are a team that's looking to carry some momentum from last year into this season, and I think a big chunk of that success is going to come from if their defense can start off as well as they ended last season, which is obviously going to be a huge task. Things have changed up a little bit. They went through some coaching changes through the offseason and throughout the regular season as well, but nonetheless, Jared Goff throwing the ball. He's got all his guys. He got Jamison Williams tonight, who by the way, I did it again, guys. I signed up for too many fantasy leagues. So I had this thing where, if you ask me to join your league, I just say yeah. Every time. It's bad. It's unhealthy. And I need to stop. I'm pretty sure I'm in that $1,000 league again, and I didn't even do the draft. So, yeah. I got Jamison Williams on one of the 17 teams that I have for fantasy football. I need to stop. I don't even care about fantasy that much, bro. People see that I do a football podcast and they're like, that guy for our fantasy league. That's pretty much what it is. I think I've only won 4 of these leagues in the past 5 years. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to say. I did a sleeper I'm on Sleeper for the first time ever, and I did a sleeper fantasy league last night while I was playing pickup basketball. And when I say did it, I mean I went through the queue and I added a bunch of players that I wanted, and I thought I sequenced them in the order that I wanted them to be drafted. And it turns out I didn't save it. So when the draft started, I drafted 9 wide receivers before I drafted a running back or a tight end. So, yeah. We'll see. This is a dynasty league too, so off to a strong start. A lot of lottery tickets, as they like to say. I'll take the Detroit Lions. 1, I'm feeling the upset. 2, I feel like the Detroit Lions are obviously coming in here healthier. Big issue is going to be whether or not the Detroit Lions can generate enough pressure to actually disrupt Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, he's really mobile and really good at clearing out of the pocket to create more space for himself. So the pressure is going to be on the secondary to go out there and make plays. So, but I'm banking on the Detroit Lions with Aiden Hutchinson and Justin Houston be able to make something happen, make something shake, if you will, especially if the Chiefs can't run the ball. So, Travis Kelce not being able to play is obviously a huge issue because they overachieve on pretty much every dump off pass they get to Travis Kelce because Travis is really good at finding the blind spots in defenses and killing them when they run zones, in particular middle linebackers. Anyway, yeah, I'll take the Detroit Lions for 500, please. We're at 6:35. We're almost done with this show. I love it. The Bengals are taking on the Browns. This is going to be massive. This is going to be This is one of my favorite games that I have to watch this season just because we're coming off of a year where Jacoby Brissett very clearly played better than Deshaun Watson did at quarterback as the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. Also, there's not a hotter seat in the NFL than Stefanski right now because they paid Deshaun too much money to just kind of give up on him. So they're going to blame the coach, who's a lot cheaper to get rid of, despite the fact that Stefanski proved that he can get it done with like a semi-competent quarterback, right? A lot of the Browns games last year came down to the fact that their secondary really struggled. So, Denzel Ward, Grant Delpit, they got to pick it up a little bit. You know, they're both good corners. They just didn't seem like they really were clicking in the Browns system until way later in the season. After the season was over with, the margin for error was really thin for the Browns, and they failed on the margin of error a lot last season because there was not much room for mistakes, and they didn't generate enough turnovers. That's what it really came down to. The Bengals, they a Super Bowl contender. You know what time it is? They got the offensive line situation. They got another year better. People are coming back healthy. Joe Burrow's coming off of like a calf strain, which honestly, if Joe Burrow's just been trying to like dip out of training camp for the past like couple years, mad respect, my dude. Because what are they gonna do? Cut you? Exactly. But yeah, biggest concern for the Bengals is they become more one-dimensional, very similar to what the Kansas City Chiefs got going on, despite the fact they have like a true number one wide receiver in Jamar Chase and a true number one wide receiver in T. Higgins, which is that's the looming storyline this entire season, by the way, folks. T. Higgins in his contract year and trying to get his extension. Everything else, you know, like Joe Mixon coming back on like an absolute dirt cheap contract. We'll see how that pans out for him. Because, like I said before, for as much as they claim that they don't really need nobody to run the ball, they really needed Joe Mixon to cook it up last season. I'm just saying. I will take, for the funsies, the Browns. It's week 1. We don't know what people are going to do. We don't know what their approach is going to be. I've seen what a full power Deshaun Watson can do. And for whatever you have to say about him as a human being, he used to know how to play football really good. So, the Browns will be burning down the city if they look like shit in this game, even though last year we saw the Bengals look pretty bad versus the Steelers, and then, you know, they played really well, turns out, in the playoffs. Who would have thought? The Texans played the Baltimore Ravens. Jeez. So, tough start off. By the way, really tough for me personally because the Baltimore Ravens are like my fourth favorite team in the NFL, probably third. I don't even like the Texans. I root for the Texans. I don't even like the team. But obviously the Seahawks, no, they're like my second favorite team. Yeah. The Ravens are my second favorite team. Seahawks are if I could pick a team in the NFL to support, it would be the Seahawks. Obviously, Bobby Wagner, big fan of him. But the Baltimore Ravens, hands down, always been one of my favorite teams in the NFL. It's tough, man. It's tough to see a Houston Texans defense that hasn't necessarily improved at the pass rush position, try and figure out a way to make Lamar Jackson look bad and generate pressure on him. It's hard to, and obviously my biggest thing is Denzel Perryman, one of my favorite linebackers in the NFL. I think it's a tough call for him to go up again, like to be basically covering J.K. Dobbins and the middle of the field constantly, which pseudo means that he has to cover Lamar Jackson at the same time. That's an insane ask for just one guy up front. I think defensively, this is where the difference is made in this game. The Baltimore Ravens probably going to run away with this one. I would be surprised if C.J. Stroud doesn't have an absolutely terrible season debut because the Baltimore Ravens are not a defense that you want to, like, they're not a defense that you want to fuck with. Roquan Smith plus Patrick Queen is problems for like even really good quarterbacks in the NFL. And a lot of what I think CJ is going to see is open is going to be throws to Dalton Schultz. So yeah, it's a tough ask. But we're going to find out a lot about CJ real fast. I'll take the Ravens for 500. For 250 to a 255. The Panthers are taking on the Falcons. This is going to be both of these teams are going to be so good in a year bowl. The biggest hipster pick of all time right now going on in the NFL is for everybody to be on the Atlanta Falcons, because for some reason, people like Arthur Smith, but they don't like running the ball. People like Arthur Smith, but don't like running the ball is the best way I can phrase that overall. Yeah, so I'll take the Panthers. Oh, wait. This is Bijan Robinson's debut, right? We're going to see Jesse Bates first time as a safety for the Atlanta Falcons. Jesse Bates first time as a safety for the Atlanta Falcons, plus another year in the system for Desmond Ridder, even though he didn't really get any shine until the end of the season, which I find interesting because there had to be some point where they knew that they were not bringing back Marcus Mariota to play quarterback for them, right? And they chose not to play Desmond, which is cool because it was a tough task for even a veteran quarterback like Marcus to go out there and make the Falcons offense work. But I mean, Drake London, second year into the league, a lot of people expecting big things from him, and Bijan Robinson combined with him, plus Tyler Algier, plus Cordero Patterson, they got a lot of dudes that you got to be concerned about on the offensive side of the ball. But as usual, the Falcons defense is a bunch of dudes you never heard of. And that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily good or anything like that, but Jesse Bates is going to be, like, when your superstar player on your defense is a safety, it takes them a second to get where the ball is at. I'm just saying. I think this is a good opportunity for Bryce Young to go up against a team that's probably going to be in the bottom the bottom quadrant of defensive presence again in the NFL, and that is lining up to look like it could potentially be big time in terms of like competitiveness in this game. And I'm going to go with the Carolina Panthers off the strength of Bryce Young and his ability to do his thing. I'm still wondering who we're throwing the ball to. But we're going to figure it out, I guess. I guess he'll figure it out. But a little bit of faith in Bryce Young can go a long way for me, especially in comparison to a guy like Desmond Ridder. We'll find out. Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Minnesota Vikings. This one is going to be a ton of fun because if you hate Baker, this game's probably going to be a ton of fun for you because the Minnesota Vikings don't necessarily have like the greatest. They don't not look like they're going to have a good defensive presence, but they do look like they're going to have a pretty decent defensive line up front. How far does that really take you in the NFL if you don't have a good secondary? A lot of the guys in the Minnesota Vikings secondary, including guys like Lewis Cine, who, I mean, people are expecting big things from him, and this is the year. This is the year, right, for Lewis Cine. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers still have like the remnants of a really talented defense up front, like. Other than that weird situation that happened where like Devin White asked for a trade randomly, which is clearly a ploy to get more money, understandable for sure, because you've been like the defense for the Buccaneers has been carrying their water plus some the last 3 years, even with Tom Brady. But yeah, the Buccaneers are a team that as long as you're spending all this time trying to figure out who's going to play, where the offensive power is going to come from, we're going to have some problems, right? Like Baker coming out here and slinging it around is a real possibility. Baker coming around here and slinging it around to the other team, also a real possibility. Minnesota Vikings, I take them to win this one, which obviously eliminates them instantaneously from them being my top 3 winless teams. I take them off of consistency. The Buccaneers in disarray in terms of offense, but consistent on defense. The Minnesota Vikings consistent on offense, but in slight disarray on defense, right? These are basically polar opposite teams of each other, and one of the few times where like Kirk Cousins has a definitive chokehold advantage at the quarterback position, and that goes a long way. Obviously, everybody's looking at Rashid White to go out here and make big things happen. We'll see how that works out for him. The Titans start off their season taking on the New Orleans Saints. This is a huge matchup because, look, I'm gonna tell you, there's a very real world where The Tennessee Titans start off this season. They don't look great to begin with. Ryan Tannehill comes out there and struggles, and they're chanting Malik Willis' name by halftime. That's a real world that we could be living in. Two veteran quarterbacks, Ryan Tannehill versus Derek Carr. Derek Carr in new digs, but he does have more talented wide receivers. Like, the year with Devontae Adams was huge. Chris Olave is a guy who has his talents, his skills, closer to the line of scrimmage, which I think helps a guy like Derek Carr in general. Obviously, because Derek Carr's thing is that he's super conservative with throwing the ball, right? Last year he wasn't, and they were able to put up a bunch of points, but they couldn't come up with any stops on defense. And the New Orleans Saints, another team that has a stout defense, but has been aging as time has gone on, despite the fact that they are heavily invested on the defensive side of the ball. Getting Derek Carr to go out there and make something happen, especially considering they don't have Alvin Kamara, is going to be tough. But look, who do you believe is more consistent? And that's the question, right? Do you believe that Ryan Tannehill is going to be more? Do you believe that Ryan Tannehill is going to go out there, be able to make plays? Because they've been trying to upgrade the wide receiver position. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a massive upgrade for them, especially considering he's going to draw Marshawn Lattimore like 99% of the time, which gives opportunities for guys on the back end like Treylon Burks. This could be a huge game for him as a wide receiver. A lot of stuff last year was blamed on Ryan Tannehill, when in actuality you could really blame it on the offensive line for the Tennessee Titans. Again, they've just been losing more and more offensive linemen, and it feels like that's the only position that's really been suffering. Like, its time is gone. Like, they lose David Long Jr., which is huge. He's with the Miami Dolphins now on the defensive side of the ball, but it feels like there's one position that has been losing free agents, but has not been adding any like valuable pieces to it, and it's the offensive line. Like, Jack Conklin's playing for the Tennessee Titans, and your boy Taylor Lewan is podcasting, right? Which, by the way, not a huge fan of Barstool. I've had my rants about Dave Portnoy on this podcast before. I like some of Bussin' with the Boys. I like their interviews. Everything else they can keep, right? I do appreciate they really like to pat themselves in the back for being football players who started a podcast in the course of the season, which I guess is something to hang your hat on, because they're not the best podcast hosted by football players. Anyway, moving right along. So this Tennessee New Orleans game, I can see this one being pretty close. I expect the Tennessee Titans to come out here and win this one, just because it's not tractor season yet, but they started the engine. You know what I mean? They got the key in the ignition. And that could be the real difference maker here, because that's the beauty of being the Tennessee Titans. They're a team that if they get a 2-touchdown lead, they can Iowa your ass, right? If you ever watched the Iowa Hawkeyes play football, basically they get a 1-touchdown lead, and then you don't see the other half of the field for like 30 minutes. Like 30 real game time minutes. You get maybe 2 more possessions. Having Derrick Henry is going to be a huge part of it. They seem like they have increased the offensive power, especially at the wide receiver position, man. Like, having contested catch wide receivers is going to be huge for, let's be real. It's a lot of people banking on Ryan Tannehill at some point during this season getting pulled out of his starting quarterback position and ending up, on the bench for Mayo Boy, or more likely Malik Willis. Like, people were losing their mind in preseason over Malik Willis, which, been there before, guys. Don't fall for it. I watched Davis Mills during the preseason. Don't fall for it. I'll take the Titans in this one. The Cardinals are taking on the Washington Commanders. I'll be taking the Washington Commanders. The Commanders are the team that had their... You want to talk about the term hope springs eternal? That is the Washington Commanders this season. They have the defensive line plus the overall defensive presence. The secondary has improved a lot. People talk about Cam Curl a lot this season. Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen been pretty consistent the last couple of years. The Washington Commanders defensively, that has not been their primary issue the last 4 years. They've been waiting on the offense to kind of put it all together. And this Sam Howell kid, a lot of people heavily invested in his success. I will say, he got a good group of wide receivers to work with. Diami Brown, and maybe it's because I'm falling for the hype from Diami Brown's YouTube channel. By the way, make sure you subscribe to him. He has a YouTube channel where he goes through his training and stuff like that. I enjoy it. it's interesting who he trains with and how he trains, but it's cool to see what an NFL player does on a regular basis just to be ready for the season. Not even to like prepare for actual camp, but just to get their body prepared for changing directions and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'll take the Commanders mainly because they're trying to win football games. So, Jacksonville takes on the Colts. This is going to be huge. Anthony Richardson's debut. He will have every single handcuff put on him possible in this situation. He won't have Jonathan Taylor. He'll be locked in on Michael Pittman Jr. because he'll probably be the only wide receiver able to get away from their DB. But I'll take the Jaguars in this one. This one seems pretty easy. It is at Indianapolis, so there's no weird mystical Florida shenanigans going on. If you guys don't know the deal, which way is it? The Texans going to the Colts. They've won like twice in Indianapolis, or like 5 times all time at Indianapolis. And then the Colts at Jacksonville have won like 4 times. Like all time. It's some stupid, crazy number or whatever. Anyway, same thing with Tennessee and Jacksonville. Thursday night football special. The 49ers are playing at the Pittsburgh Steelers. This should be Sunday night football, but we don't live in a just world. But yeah, this is going to be huge. This is probably going to be the best defensive matchup you see in all of week 1. There's just too many, like TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Patrick Peterson. A lot of people down on Patrick Peterson. I don't know why. Shout out to Pat P for doing his thing at all times. Combined with, on the other side of the ball, one of the Bosa brothers. It's Nick Bosa, obviously. Combined with Nick Bosa, Fred Warner. It's going to be fun. It's going to be too much fun on the defensive side of the ball, which means the game is going to be boring for normal people. Interesting to see how the run game looks in this one. Like I said, my pay-per-view matchup is Fred Warner versus Najee Harris in this one. On the other end, with the 49ers, like the multitude of people that they have that they hand the ball off that pretend to be running backs, Christian McCaffrey is going to be, it's going to be cool. Christian McCaffrey, Alex Highsmith, lace them up. It's going to be fun to watch. The 49ers are going to have to get weird in this one, and I like that. They're going to Pittsburgh, too. That's the wild one. The Packers are at Chicago for the midday game, so it won't be the sun will still be up there. The sun will still be up. Packers at Chicago is going to be huge. Jordan Love's first debut is like the true blue number 1 starter. The continuation of whether or not Romeo Doubs and Christian Watkins are going to be a good wide receiver duo up front. Also, what is it, Sam Laporta? Sam Laporta debut at tight end. The Chicago Bears, a lot of people expecting Justin Fields to make major steps forward, along with DJ Moore being more accessible, Khalil Herbert being the true number 1 running back, even though like a lot of the time last year he was because David Montgomery spent most of last season hurt. But expecting to see a lot of variance. I'll say this much in terms of Chicago. Oh, by the way, for the Steelers-49ers game, I'll take the Steelers. The Packers-Bears. The Bears are still waiting for a lot of defensive players, even though Jaquan Brisker, if there was one person that emerged on the defensive side of the ball last year for the Bears, it was Brisker. That guy looks amazing. He also looks massive because I think he's like 6'4". People talk about Kyle Hamilton as a 6'4" safety. I think Jaquan Brisker's like 6'3". And they look massive. They all look that height on the field. But the Packers and the Bears on this one, there's just too many issues on the defensive side of the ball, especially in terms of generating pressure on the quarterback from the Bears, for me to think that the Packers can't go out here and win this game. They still have Aaron Jones. They still got some really talented wide receivers. And once again, a lot of quarterbacks who make it to the NFL, they can go out there and operate really well when they're not under pressure. And I don't think the Bears can generate pressure. So I'm going to go with the Packers on that. Eagles taking the Patriots. Man. Really excited to see what Ramondre Stevens does for the Patriots, because guess what? He gonna have to carry this team. Let's be for real. Remember that one time Sony Michel carried the Patriots in the playoffs and nobody really talks about it anymore? Ramondre Stevenson, come on down. Expecting you to be the savior, because the pressure that was on the passing game last season was way too high. They were waiting on Damian Harris to get healthy. They had some offensive line issues overall, but the Patriots defense, always nasty. always nasty up front. I'm expecting the number one offensive line in the NFL, though, to literally bulldoze the Eagles. I'm sorry, the Patriots up front. This game should be pretty close, but I think it goes with the Eagles. A lot of it is going to be close because the Eagles are not afraid to go out there and run the clock out with the ball. That's just how it is. The Dolphins take on the Chargers. This is, oh, man. I cannot emphasize how much fun this game is going to be. Two young quarterbacks, Justin Herbert, the social media quarterback, Justin Herbert, the man that nobody believes in, despite the fact that he's proven himself to be quite the threat in Tua Tagovailoa. Some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. We know Keenan Allen, the route master. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, the big catch guy, the end zone bomber. And time to find out if Quentin Johnson, well, we won't find out in this game, but Quentin Johnson being a huge threat as an offensive player in this game could pan out pretty well because it seems like a lot of resources are going to be tied up in trying to stop Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, which is the goal, I guess, the entire season. So, yeah, really pumped about this one. I'm expecting, because the Chargers are really bad in close games, the Dolphins to come out and make this happen. Dolphins are still a team on the defensive side of the ball. They got a lot of really talented football players. They pieced it together really well last year. The biggest question coming into this season is the run game, right? That's what it is. Offensive line, run game. If they don't have that kind of balance that you can count on to be able to go out there and get you yards, and it has to all be on Tua's shoulders, it has to all be on Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill running the most distance, the longest distance throughout the course of the season, or I think it was like by game they ran the most as individual wide receivers, and obviously they averaged the most distance ran on routes by any wide receiver duo in the NFL. If it has to come down to one of those again, we may be in trouble. But I'll take the Dolphins, even though I like both of those teams. I'll take the Dolphins just because of the defensive presence of the Dolphins is significantly better than the Chargers. Also, it's time to play our favorite game. Is Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa enough to generate pressure on a quarterback? I guess we'll find out. The Raiders are taking on the Broncos. Oh, man. So the Raiders are a team that if I did top 5 teams that I think can go winless in the NFL, the Raiders would have made that list. There's a mass exodus of players, not a lot of replacements going on. They do have all their draft picks, if I'm not mistaken. They actually have extra draft picks, if I'm not mistaken. So it actually behooves them not to do well this season, especially considering doing well with Jimmy Garoppolo. What's the benefit of doing that? You get a couple years where you get to the point where you're in a key situation and you don't necessarily have the guy to be able to make it happen. The defensive side of the ball was lacking last year, big time, in huge situations. They have a really good pass rush up front, which goes a long way, especially when you're talking about like covering up for younger corners. But everything else, oh boy, they don't have Denzel Perryman anymore, so they can't even count on him. It's the Max Crosby show on the defensive side of the ball. Chandler Jones obviously huge too. But yeah, man, I'll take the Broncos. Broncos running away in this one. I know it's a defensive matchup. I'm expecting the Broncos to pull away in this one, man. Their defense. Can we even expect the carryover defensively from last season? I don't think so. The Rams take on the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going with the Seahawks because, like I said before, the Rams are a team that I think potentially could go winless this season. I want to say it's the bad kind of youth, and the veterans on their team, most of them not available to play. The Seahawks are a team that's on a massive upswing. It's not many times that you hit that hard on a draft class, and the Seahawks have somehow done it. Biggest question is whether they're going to be able to generate pass rush, which against the Rams offensive line, congratulations. You ain't got to do much. It felt like last year, a lot of the times when you watch them play, all you got to do is fall down and somehow you ended up right next to Matthew Stafford. The big question for the Rams, obviously they don't have Triple Crown winner and Cooper Kupp at the wide receiver position for this game. It means it's going to rely on a lot of other people to get wide open. And if they can pull it, if somebody can get wide open, you told me Van Jefferson went out there and had a 150-yard game with 2 touchdowns. I 100% believe you because I think he's more than capable of it. It just hasn't shown itself the last couple years. One, because he's coming off injury and stuff like that too, right, from the Super Bowl. But overall, the Seahawks are the better team across the board at every single position except defensive tackle. Yeah. And they're getting better. Let's be for real. Ohio State wide receivers, basically a lock. Jackson Smith and Jigba about to cook this season. And he's not even going to have to cook that hard, bro. He's like a line cook, and Tyler Lockett's the chef, and DK Metcalf is the sous chef, you know? He's like a lot. He just follows the recipe, right? Anyway, I'll take the Seahawks. No bias there. Wink, wink. The Cowboys are taking on the Giants. If the Cowboys lose this one, you got to clown them. I don't believe in the Giants at all. Like, I know they've taken massive steps forward. They figured out some offensive line situations. But the fact of the matter is, in my eyes, they still one-dimensional, bro. They're still a run-centric team. Just because they didn't want to pay Saquon Barkley doesn't mean they're not a run-centric team to me. Just because they paid Daniel Jones doesn't mean that he's all of a sudden going to be not Daniel Jones. So I'm banking on, one, this is one of the better secondaries the Giants are going to play all season. Excited to see what Jalen Hyatt's capable of doing. He looked really good in preseason, but I've seen Daniel Jones play football before. And when a lot of the times they were able to make a good chunk of the games close because they controlled the clock more than they controlled the field, if that makes sense. They didn't control the scoreboard all that well. They controlled the clock of the game, making the games close for them and putting their defense in good positions to go out there and be successful, and they won the war of attrition. Obviously this year, big for Dak because according to Cowboys fans, every year for the past 30-something years has been their year. We'll see if it actually is this one, because I heard some people predict the Cowboys win the Super Bowl. And hey, man, if you want to make some money, I respect that, because that's a take. That's the kind of take that gets you, especially if you work at ESPN. That's the kind of take that makes you money. On social media, it's the take that gets you on SportsCenter. It's the take that gets you on First Take, baby, in the chair across from Stephen A. Smith. Cowboys winning the Super Bowl. I done figured it out. Somehow this is the year. I will say their team is stupid stacked. So if they don't get it done this year, it's going to hurt. Because, Michael Gallup plus CeeDee Lamb, they got Michael Parsons in the pass rush situation. They finally figured out middle linebacker, which is, Leighton Vander Esch doing his thing. We'll see what happens. And then, of course, Stephon Gilmore, the ghillie suit, locking it up, as he always does. Quiet but deadly is Stephon Gilmore. And that Trayvon Diggs, obviously, as well. It's hard to not see them have a really good year. We saw what happened last year. They started off hot. The back end of the season, they kind of got stagnant on offense. Tony Pollard's coming off a broken leg, but nonetheless, they were still able to run the ball pretty damn well. They figured out how to patchwork the offensive line situation. They have one of the best left tackles we've seen in the past 8 years, past 5 years probably. Tyron Smith, Terrence Steele, finding him and figuring out how to get him in a situation where you can justify that his contract, he got underpaid on his extension. But yeah, man, that's what it really comes down to. Everybody knows the pressure's on Dak, but really, pressure's on everybody to come out here and make this happen. It's too many talented football players on this team for them to not be able to piece together. But we don't want to blame the person that we all think is holding the team back. Nobody wants to for some reason. Weird. The Buffalo Bills take on the Jets on Monday Night Football. Aaron Rodgers debut, right? Breece Hall's back. It's the thing. They're trying to make the New York Jets the main character for the NFL for this NFL season, mainly because a lot of us with eyes that function correctly saw the Jets literally were being held back at the quarterback position anytime Zach Wilson took a snap. Anytime anybody else, like Joe Flacco played really well for the Jets last season and nobody talked about it. They were in a one possession game with the Cleveland Browns, and Joe Flacco was out there slinging that thing. I remember the first 3 weeks of the season where Joe Flacco went out there and did his thing. Like he was trying to get another $100 million. So everybody's thinking it's like a plug and play situation. I will say this: if there is one thing you can say about Aaron Rodgers, his presence elevates the skill level of his teammates, and that is an extremely difficult talent to have as a football player. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you on week 1. Oh, my prediction, sorry. I'll be taking the Buffalo Bills, the far better team in this one. I'm interested. Matt Milano versus Breece Hall is going to be fun. Dalvin Cook right before I started the show, they reported that Dalvin Cook is clear to play. Matt Milano, who, like I said earlier in the show, only guy that I feel like can even challenge Fred Warner for the throne, him and Roquan Smith, of the king of the linebackers in the NFL, because he's one of the best coverage linebackers, period. Moving on, I'll take the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills over the Jets is still going to be a lot of fun. Wow. I guess it's week 2. Double Monday Night Football is week 2? Maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, I know something that you don't know. I'm done. I'm done, just like you're done on this show. You're done listening to me talk. I'm done talking about football. It is 15 minutes before the NFL season kicks off. And thank you to everybody who watches this in the past, present, and the future. I really appreciate it. We're back. The next show that I'll be doing is on Tuesday after I watch every single game in the NFL. Yes, I'm doing that again and going to hate my life. I'll be doing a Friday show next week as well. That'll be just a regular sports show. Tuesday will be back to being the NFL only show, and we'll get it all done. We're going to lock it up, ladies and gents. Turn it back up, and the broke boy shall reign supreme once more. All right, I'm out. Make sure you, wait, what did I used to say? Oh, yeah. Go home, Roger.